Okay, welcome to another episode of The Fundable Founder. I'm here today with Greg Segall. Alyce, welcome, Greg.
Thanks, Charlie.
I'm excited to have you on today because I know you have a great story to tell. And, you and I go back to pretty far, about 10 years, I think,
Or more.
well before you decided to start Alyce. And I do remember we had a lunch in Newton before you started Alyce, where you were kind of laying out what you were thinking about and how to go about fundraising. And so I feel it was great to be part of your process in that. So why don't you start by telling us a bit about what Alyce is?
Yeah, so Alyce is a enterprise SaaS company that targets sales and marketers to use gifting, swag, incentives, rewards to be able to really get to know people better and be able to incentivize and just connect them on an individual one-to-one basis. Simple enough.
Yeah,
So it's basically
become
it's become like the number one way for people to actually engage, especially during COVID, virtually, where Alyce allows the person to be able to pick what they want, tells you more about the person, and then allows you to really, dig in deeper in terms of showing that you're investing in both their time and the money into them. And that's been a huge, huge boon for us, especially as all these companies have gone virtual in such a fast, fashion here. But we've obviously been at it for the last few years.
Are there any specific examples of kind of the value add you've provided to some of your customers, especially during this COVID period?
So I think if you think about any investment or any relationships that are going on right now, one of the biggest problems is that every single channel is saturated right now.
Mm-hmm.
And more importantly, everybody is taking this very generic approach to every single channel that they're using, whether it's, emails, LinkedIn, calls, whatever it might be. Everyone plays on this whole breadth strategy. How many messages can I get out there? How much of a wide net can I cast? And what we're all about at Alyce is, well, how do you actually make every single one of those into a moment? And how do you use gifting and Alyce, just the entire platform, to be able to actually help you dig deeper into those relationships? And that can happen at any stage throughout that. Obviously, we focus very heavily where the ROI is in terms of building the sales funnel and the marketing funnel.
Yep.
But it also blends directly into your CS strategy and your customer strategy and your renewals and your partnership strategy and your HR strategy. All that stuff plays deeply into that, because every one of those places you're trying to actually get closer with individuals inside of business.
That's fantastic. And I've always wanted to know, how did you come up with the name?
Well, we've known each other for a long time. So my last company was One Pica.
Yes.
And it was spelled ONE space PICA. Everyone would spell it wrong, or say it wrong. It was Una Pica. I'm like, we're not Pikachu. Like, come on. Like, that's just not the way it is. And so this is a very concerted name when I was thinking about this business. And so I had 4 key things. One was I wanted it to be an A name, because we're at the top of the alphabet. Every time we're listed on any single, list, we're there, which is awesome. And that's played out really nicely for us. Number 2 is I wanted it to be an actual name, because the mission of the business was about how do we actually bring people closer together. So personify that and use a name that was there. I really liked Alyce specifically because it has only positive connotations. So Alice in Wonderland, Alice from the Brady Bunch, anybody that named Alyce always had a problem. Of course, rock on, that's always the way it is. So yeah, always positive connotations around that. And the next was, as I've told you many times about this, I'm like a huge domain geek. So I've collected domains for, 20 years now. And I'm just a sucker for like 5-letter domains and being able to get the .com. So that 212, I'm just like a super geek around that. That's just my own neuroses. And, I loved Alyce. And, the last thing I liked about Alyce, also, we want to be able to acquire the .com, which we did after we raised our first round of capital. And so it started as Alyce.co, changed over to Alyce.com, where there's a whole bunch of funny situations that happened, through that, which is not really safe for work and not really great around here. And that was it. Yeah. So it was a very, very concerted, name right from the get-go, compared to my last 2 businesses that had really shitty names.
Yeah. So let's go back to the beginning when you were thinking about starting Alyce. What really inspired you to do this? I know you were very deliberate in the way you thought about starting your business. So, what was your inspiration, and what really kind of helped seal the deal for you to say, yeah, this is the business I want to run, and then I'm going to spend the next 10 years of my life doing?
Yeah, you've seen my other businesses. So this is my 3rd business. The first 2 businesses, well, I guess I'll jump to instead of give me the 20-hour version here, I'll skip to the actual impetus and sort of the backing behind this.
Yep.
I had my daughter about 4.5 years ago, right at the same time I started Alyce. And my wife was pregnant at the time with my daughter. And as you know, having kids, it just flips your entire perspective on life to go from being very egocentric and like everything's about me, to holy crap, the world is about how do I make it better for this little human being that just like, all of a sudden you get this unconditional love for, right? And so, when that was happening, I just said, well, if I'm going to start a company, I want it to be something that actually has a much more massive impact on that mission of making the world a better place for her.
Yep.
And so, I told you about this at that lunch. I remember the high table with the white, the wood, we were sharing a beer over this, I was telling you about this whole Alyce idea at the time, 4 or 5 years ago.
What I remember is you ate a really healthy salad and I ate like a cheeseburger. So
I do remember that. And we went, we were geeking out over that. Yes, exactly. Right. So again, more neuroses there too. So the key thing was I wrote down this on the original whiteboard, where I was writing down the original idea for this, which I still have a picture of, which I think I can show you. And I said, there's 3 pillars of giving that I wanted to actually be a part of this that would allow it to say that this is a huge impact on the world. The first one was, if we can make the giving between people super authentic and just truly genuine between those individuals, it fundamentally will just be something that like people want to use it because it just is doing good in terms of how to actually bring people together in a true way, instead of, oh, it's another thing that's blasting out spam to people or, whatever the hell it is that's there. So I was, pillar giving number 1. Giving pillar number 2 was, how do we give back to the planet? So everything we do is built around sustainability and sort of how do you make sure that everything that we're doing, especially with $120 billion a year being spent on all this crap that nobody wants, that's there, right?
Like another half zip pullover.
Another half zip pullover, or sending me chocolate feet to get my foot in the door, or sending me toast to say your competition is toast. Like it's like nobody wants that crap anymore, right? Or sending me a large jacket when I wear a size medium, that's it. Right. So that was the second pillar. And the third pillar was, how do we make giving to those in need also a core pillar of the business? And so I was looking for a business model that encompassed all of those things together. And that was why I was very intentional in terms of like trying to find this, this idea. And when you started to see how much waste, how much, superfluous spend and just things that were happening in the corporate world, I was just like, we could fundamentally change an industry that hasn't changed in 100 years and take a software experience perspective on, lens on this, and fundamentally just be able to use to scale authenticity. And so that was the whole initial, impetus. And again, that's become clear and clear, but it was literally written down on day 1 in September of 2015 as to like what I wanted the business to be able to accomplish. And as Alyce gets bigger, we just donated $300,000, to charities.
That's awesome.
It's like really awesome to see. And if, we continue on our trajectory, we'll be at 3 million this year. And then you get to 30 million and it's, it becomes the largest charity in the world, within the matter of the next like 4 to 5 years.
That's awesome. And the other thing I remember is just how much like customer discovery you did, kind of interviews with people, interviews with VCs. Like, does this sound like a good idea or not? And I think that's something a lot of aspiring entrepreneurs miss out on. They think, I really like this idea, so everyone's really going to like this idea, and they don't do the customer discovery. Talk about that process a little bit.
Yeah, I think I learned from the second business I started where I took a if we build something cool, people will use it, or if you build it, they will come, mantra, right? And I took a polar opposite approach to that, with Alyce. And so it was sort of a quick and dirty run on that second company. And I ended up doing a prototype, being an engineering and art nerd, design nerd that I was. And I took that out to, I think it was about 10 different agency owners for who I thought was building this like referral network. It was like a gift, had gifting involved in that, which I told you about before. And, quickly found from them where they're like, this is the stupidest idea. Like, what are you even wasting your time doing? So it's good having friends where you can literally say that to each other, and that's the type of people I try and surround myself with, where it's just like no holds barred and you don't take it personally. But all of them in that prototype had said, what about that gifting thing? I always forget what to send. I never know what to do. I always, I don't know the right times to do it. I'm sure there's more impactful ways to do this. And it's just like, as I look back on my notes, from 10 lunches over 2 weeks, it was impaired, or it was just obvious how much that was a big problem and how much that I could solve that and use that as an impetus. So then that was September 2015, the end of that. In October 2015, all I did was just customer research. And I told you the story. I talked to 513 companies over that 30-day span. And it was just all my friends in my network. And I was like, I just want to talk to anyone in marketing, sales, HR, blah, 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 whatever it was. And my original thought was like, well, maybe it's a consumer app that we take to the market. You started to realize the graveyard of consumer gifting companies that have been in this space, over the last 15 years, except for one that got bought for $50 million called Karma by Facebook in 2008 or 2009 timeframe. Every other one has just, raised a bunch of money and just, died off. So it was very apparent that, corporate was huge. And then the second thing I looked at there too, and really recognized from that research, was the CAC on consumer to actually get somebody to spend. Like, it would be $50 to acquire the customer. I'd have to get them to spend $250 just to get a payback on that, because I was making a 20% margin at the time. So corporate was like, well, they'll drop $100,000 like it's nothing, on these things. And that was just a much faster, way for us to get to market and do that. So it was very concerted. And the same thing on the investor side. Once I decided that this was like the idea to run with, and I started to get that traction of, that first 20, 30, 50 customers that were in there, which happened very quickly because of the viral effect of Alyce, which was another nice side effect of what we built. I did the same thing with the investors, just started to pitch the idea to, folks just like not looking for money, but just getting feedback and also building the relationships with, again, Founder Collective, Eric Paley, who's at Founder Collective, became an investor. I pitched to him like 8 times over like 8 months, where I was like, here's where we are, here's what we're doing, and I think he really appreciated that, and then saw the traction and saw what we were actually doing. And just every time I met with him, gave really critical feedback where I just took it back to heart to be like, oh yeah. For example, the best advice he ever gave me, early on, was, you are an agency CEO. Your job was to say yes. You're a product-based CEO, and your job is to say no.
Interesting.
And that is going to be the hardest thing for you to figure out, which is focus is success. You've got to build and understand and be empathetic to the actual problem you're building, and not just go building something that was cool. And that literally flipped my entire dynamic, in terms of how to think about Alyce.
That's so awesome. And was that advice that you heard and you're like, that makes so much sense? Or did you have to go back and think about that for like a month and really agree to flip your focus? I'm just curious.
It was, I think I told you a lot about this over the years. Like, I'm a huge podcast and YouTube geek, right? So I'd listen to like the 20-minute VC a lot and just like understand from the VC's perspective how they were thinking, which helped me think bigger on a lot of those things. And then also like SaaStr was a really big early one, that I looked at. But the best series that I ever watched was How to Start a Startup. It was in 2014, and I wish I'd watched it in 2014. Ended up watching it in 2016, when I was running Alyce. And it was an entire series that was put on by Stanford University, and it had like, all the original founders, like, Ben from Pinterest, and Brian from Airbnb. And it was like their early stage of their journey, and hearing their stuff and hearing how you go through, it was just very, very helpful. Just to understand their perspective and how they were looking at building the business and the problems they're running into, and then how they were trying to solve those as it went through as well. But the investors, the thing that was beneficial about the investors, again, for folks that are trying to start up, like, it's a relationship game. Like, they have to you can't just walk in there and be like, give me $500,000, give me $1 million, give me $10 million, whatever it is. You're building these relationships over sometimes years, to where it gets to. And that happened very well because I was building those relationships for the first year of trying to run Alyce. And then when it came time to get the investment in Alyce, actually a year and a half later, we had folks lined up, because they were actually following the trajectory and following the progress of the business as it went on.
Yeah,
that's a huge mistake that most companies make, and even the companies I advise. Huge mistake is like, okay, I need to get money right now. I have 3 months left of funding. It's like you're missing the point. Like, it's a journey on how you take that.
Exactly, and I like to actually tell people now that we don't invest in early stage technology companies. We invest in early stage technology entrepreneurs, and it's the relationship that we build over that 7 to 8 months that gets me comfortable to invest in the entrepreneur.
Yeah, I think just to that point, thinking about, so Peter Blacklow from Boston Seed was our first like real got it. He was the one who led the seed round. And
I got it too. I just couldn't convince my partners.
I know. I remember the meetings. I was like, Charlie, come on, man.
I know.
But like I met with Peter Blacklow at the same Starbucks in Waltham, probably 8 to 10 times. We would just go there and I would just like give him an update, and we just like go into the business more. And it was more of like, I was using him as like a brainstorming, like somebody who just got marketing and got the understanding of it. And what was interesting is that and just to your exact point, the investors are especially early seed, pre-seed, and even angels, in times of that. But let's move to sort of the seed, or pre-seed seed stage. They're totally betting on you as the person. Alyce has we bobbed and weaved, through the years where it wasn't really like we got the first investment in the end of 2016, right, which is our first angel round, convertible note, did a second tranche, 6 months later after we showed more success around that. And then we raised the seed round a year later,
right.
From that. And it was really interesting because the business that Peter and I talked about. I remember going to his office for the first official board meeting, and we were debating, should Alyce be a customer success platform or should it be, a sales and marketing platform? And he was very much on the face of like fighting for why it should be a customer success retention based platform, because that's where the relationships are. Money's, needs to be spent there. It could be growing. And I'm sitting there and I'm like, yeah, but it's 10-to-1 spend on sales and marketing and like,
Right.
And that stuff. And then we had this whole conversation around like, is it mercenary? Like you're going to a mercenary space. And I was like, well, go where the money is. Let's figure that out because there's much more chance of us getting the business. And that ended up being right. So again, there was like this, but he was supportive of all of that, like throughout the whole entire thing. That's the right thing. There's different, here's the risks, rewards. It's really important, again, having those investors lined up in the beginning, having those conversations early on before they invest, because it's very imperative to understand when, like, it's all hunky-dory when you're getting the money and all things are going well with the company. But when things are not going well with the company and you're dealing with massive, potential turmoil in the business, or like, employee issues, or like, not hitting your sales numbers or whatever it is that I've seen with a lot of different companies, in the past, and companies I'm advising, that's the true sign of what a true investor is going to be like in terms of those stages that are there. And I've heard nightmare story after nightmare story on that as well, which is also, if you look at every investor that has come into that has come into Alyce's rounds, everyone's been a previous operator. Everyone.
That's interesting.
Everyone. We had some investors, very, very well-known investors in the space, I'll leave them nameless on here, that really wanted to invest in Alyce. And I'm like, but you're looking at us too much from a finance lens. You're not looking at it in terms of the vision and the investment. It's like how Jeff Bezos, with the Amazon shareholder letter back in the day, where he's like, you're taking a 10+ year journey with me where we're going to lose a shit ton of money, but eventually it's going to pay off because we're building the infrastructure for what then obviously became a huge moat for what Amazon is. It's a similar thing that I look at when we're talking about, ourselves. And of course, we've got to hit our numbers, and now we're in this like growth phase of the business right now. But those early days are really important, that it's somebody who's going to be there to help push on you in the vision, but trust you enough in the business to be able to make those calls as it goes.
Right. That's so right. And then, my recollection at the seed round is you had quite a lot of investors interested. And, I mean, how did you think about kind of creating a little bit of that interest and that fear of missing out, and any advice you can give for kind of bringing multiple investors to the table?
So, well, at the end of the day, we had a lot of investors going into it, but it was like a 7-month journey in the seed round, because I was like, oh, we should raise in March of 2017. We didn't close the seed round until October of 2017. And honestly, we probably started in like January, February, because we're like, okay, we just closed the angel round. We need to start the whole process now, keep building the relationships. I traveled to New York 7 weeks in a row to meet with all different investors in New York. Everyone turned us down. Every single one turned us down. And Boston, back to back, like people just turning us down over and over and over again. And it was not until I actually met with a friend of mine, Sam Dunn, who runs Robin, here in Boston. And I remember sitting down with him, and we went to lunch in South, I guess it was like the Seaport District, and I forget the restaurant. It was another healthy restaurant, just so you know. And he did not get a cheeseburger, but the interesting thing, and the biggest piece of advice that I got from him, and then was reiterated over and over and over again, was that my pitch was totally backwards for the seed round. It worked for the angel round. It was completely backwards for the seed round. My pitch was, holy crap, I'm a bootstrapped founder, that has taken this business from here to here. Holy crap, it's in a big industry. Go help us, let's do this. And you get those early folks that just believe in you and understand you.
That's right.
What he said, and I remember this distinctly, was he goes, reverse your pitch. And I was like, what do you mean by that? And he's like, you got to paint the vision and get them bought off that this is a monster opportunity, and that you are now taking the stepping stones to get to that next step. So that first step was like, yeah, we've already done this, but here's the next 6 steps that we have planned out to get there. But you've already got them bought off on the vision, instead of saying, well, see how many things that we've done to get to this like minor, small revenue number that's there, to, again, an investor who's investing in companies that have tens of millions of dollars of revenue, and you've got 10,000 ARR. You're like nothing, but they're betting on you being able to get from 10,000 to 10 million. And it's really about them getting them bought off on that vision in the first like 2 slides. And there's a guy, Andy Raskin, who does a really good job of talking about this. It's a newer concept that's come out, but he calls it the strategic narrative. If you get people bought off on the old game, new game, the strategic narrative of the business, which now I've only started to really delve into over the last couple of years, with him and other folks, like that chain, that becomes the strategy. And you can also get investments on that, because either the person's going to believe in that old game, new game, or they're not. And if they do, that's an investor who doesn't really give a crap about what your revenue is. They're going to care about how structured are you and able to get to that next stage, and how disciplined are you and focused are you in terms of being able to get to that next stage, there as well.
Yeah, no, it always drives me a little bit crazy when I hear an entrepreneur say like, oh, the VCs aren't interested in us until we get to $1 million of ARR. Mm-hmm. It's like, well, you haven't sold them on the vision then, right? Like
we raised our A round at $500,000 ARR.
Yeah.
And we raised at a crazy valuation.
Yeah.
And it was because they believed in the vision and they saw the trajectory. Now, we had high traction at that point, to get there. And we hit $1 million very shortly thereafter, because we had a lot of things moving in our direction that was there. But there's no hard and fast rules. No. And the groups that do have hard and fast rules, of which I've talked to many, where they're like, we aren't talking to you until you're at 10 million ARR. It's very short-sighted in terms of that, because they're missing on the but it shows you how they're going to invest and how they're going to be thinking about your business.
That's right.
You have, and even same thing with seed investors and a lot of the folks, because there's exponentially more seed rounds funds now 4 years later, 3 years later, than what was there, just a short time ago, with a hell of a lot more money to deploy right now, with a lot bigger rounds, that they're actually putting on, which means you've got higher hurdles to hit in order to be able to actually get to the right valuation metrics, to be able to support that.
That's exactly right.
Huge issues now. So anyway, back to the many investors, like going through all that failure, I redid the pitch. I went back to some of those other investors, and then they're like, "Oh, we get it," right? But most of it was the newer investors that sort of came in there. And then I went back to Eric Paley, like at Founder Collective, and back to Boston Seed, and all those folks. And what really did it for us was I got one group on the West Coast to like very quickly get it, and then literally hand us a term sheet. Like it was like almost to the point of like it. Don't go with that type of investor, by the way. But I was able to use that to actually drive, Boston Seed and the rest of the groups to be like, look, I've got a term sheet. I got to make a decision. And then very quickly, it was like, it was there. Also note, the term sheet I took from, the East Coast here was way lower in terms of valuation than what the West Coast fund was offering us, which played so much into our favor, because when we raised the A rounds, we didn't need to be at the same valuation to be able to actually support that as we went to the next stage. And I'm seeing so many of these valuations right now are absolutely absurd, because you've got to be a perfectionist in terms of execution to be able to get to that next stage right now. And so many people, there's so many ups and downs that happen. You've got to build yourself flexibility, both in the amount of capital you're taking, and then also in the expectations of revenue to get to the next round, knowing that at some point the bubble is going to burst. Like it just can't keep going up the way that it is.
No, that's fantastic advice. And I know a lot of first-time founders especially really focus on valuation and other things, and they don't want to get diluted that much. And what I always try to remind people is, if you start out at a lower valuation, you're going to give up some equity today to get the money you want. But down the road, if you're executing right, like you're going to continue to raise bigger and bigger rounds at better and better valuations. And over time, those VCs will, there'll be some spiffs in there for your equity if you're doing the right thing, and you're going to end up at the same point anyway. Just make it a little bit less of a hard road to travel on yourself. And then the other point is, an investor who gives you a quick term sheet hasn't built a relationship with you, and they're just looking at you as an investment that they're an option they're hoping is going to pay off, and they're not going to probably provide all that much guidance along the way. Those investors that you mentioned before, I'm sure have provided a ton of value since 2017.
Infinite.
Yeah. So, it's not just the valuation you get, it's the valuation, but it's all the value you get from the VC, not just the capital. So we're almost out of time, but I wanted to touch on one more thing that I think you do really well, and that's how to build your team, right? Like, what are just real quick advice on how to build a team? Because you do a great job at it, and you've got a great culture at Alyce.
Yeah, I mean, it stems back to like the three pillars of giving and the values of the business. I think one of the things that people get enamored with is like, what's the experience of this person and blah, blah, blah. Like, did they come from Salesforce? Did they come from whatever company it
Right.
is? And, there is a point in time, and it is important to be bringing in experience. I don't want to downplay that at all. But if you build the company and the team around the core values of how you want to see the business run and you embody those, it's authentically spread throughout the rest of the organization as you go. So there's the old adage, like your first 5 hires are what basically sets the tone and the DNA for everything else that happens in the business. Like it's very hard to pull that out of the business after you go. And again, trying to build a business where it's about impact, like the folks, like it's part of our interview process. Like,
Right.
whether they know it or not, we're asking them a lot of those questions to understand like how they've interacted before. And you talk about hard situations and you see how much are they using the word we, for
Yeah.
example.
Yeah.
Right. Versus
Yeah.
I. Like there's just
Yeah.
like things that you have to like, temper. And again, I've, hired 1,000 people in my career. So like I've gone enough through I can basically quickly pick out, whether the person's going to fit or not at this point. But it was a very concerted effort in terms of the first few folks that joined Alyce, and it set the tone for everything else. And then anyone that was not doing that, they didn't last at Alyce for very long. Like there was a very quick, rope, which is something I did a super, super poor job of at my last business, my first business, where it was like just string along, let the bad habits and the bad eggs, sort of, fester in there. Where again, bad eggs in terms of our company doesn't mean that they weren't great at other companies, which they were, because they fit into a different culture and they had a different mindset in terms of how they wanted to be in those businesses. You've got to be thinking about that. And then every understanding also that the company has different stepping stones and the people have different stepping stones. And you've got to really make sure that you're understanding how those things align as it goes to.
Tremendous advice today, Greg, on start launching a business and doing it deliberately and how to fundraise and how to build your team. I knew you'd be a great guest on the Fundable Founder. I do have one final question though, and that's how would you describe yourself in one word?
Wow. Passionate.
Passionate. I like it. Well, Greg, it's been great catching up with you. Really look forward to your success going forward at Alyce and all the impact you're going to have.
Yeah. Thanks to you all for all the support too, as you know, as a friend too.
Yes,
Thanks a lot,
exactly.
Charlie.
Thanks.
To innovate, invent, and disrupt? We're your partner to fuel your growth. Contact us to learn more.